Right, okay, everybody. So just check your stance, check your feet, and then waist a little bit forwards in your feet if you can. See how that feels. Sort of deliberately angle forwards for a little bit. This is very exaggerated, and you don't want to fall over. But then just gradually think of this part, your hips, just sinking back. As you do, releasing in the tail of your spine, so that if I just sink back, you can see now my bum's pulling me backwards. But if I can release here, particularly in the lower part of my back, and just allow the hips to drop, everything comes to the upright. So we always describe these things of necessity really in very linear terms. We do this and then we do that and then we do this and then we get that and so on and so forth. It doesn't really work like that, because it's very hard, for instance, to get that sense of releasing tension in the lower part of your back if your weight's up. And yet at the same time, as I've just pointed out, it's difficult to let your weight drop if your lower back's tight. So we have very much this chicken and egg situation, which gradually over a period of time, you manage, you let your hips drop a little bit, that drops the center of gravity a little. We're able to release a little bit of tightness, not just in the back, but in other parts of the body as a consequence. And that means we can root down a little bit better, and that means we can release a bit more, and so on and so forth. As I was just saying, this is not this is not a process that has an end. I don't think anybody I know who's been doing Tai Chi for any significant amount of time would claim that they can root down and they don't need to work at it anymore. It's an ongoing process, and we change. Every time you change one thing in your body, everything else will change. And then that change will provoke another change, and so it goes on. Life is about change, I suppose you could say. So what we want to do is to, in a way, sit back and observe that change, and to work with the changes, to work with what's positive in the changes, what is bringing us forwards, what is actually helping us. And we want to try and work with that on an ongoing basis. And as new things come up, we can kind of consider those and work with those. Some things you might try, and then after a while it's no longer appropriate, and so on and so forth. So all of these things will serve to bring your attention into your body. Ideally, I've talked about this before, and I've talked about the idea that anything is good to anchor your attention in your body. But from a Tai Chi perspective, and from a point of improving our stances, improving our movements, and to plumbing the depths of this art, insofar as I'm able to talk about that, what we actually need to do is to focus on specific areas, or to start off with, to really cultivate this awareness of our feet, our legs, and our weight. So for instance, as you do this, are you moving to one side a little bit, in either direction? Doesn't really matter. If you are, can you just resolve to try and maintain your weight in the middle? If I come a bit closer, you won't be able to see my feet, but so quite often when we turn, we get drawn across or pushed over. Whereas in fact, what we want to try and do, if you look there, you'll see hardly any movement at all in my legs and knees. What I feel is when I do that is the feeling that comes just before the weight moves, if that makes sense. The kind of prelude to that, this slight bit of pressure going down into the leg. And if I feel that and then go a bit further, then it will pull me across. So you start to get a sense for how far you can move. And I'll talk a little bit later in this class about how we then go from what is actually a relatively small amount of movement here to a bigger movement in the shoulders and hence in the arms. If you already know what I'm going to say, then you can bring it into the movement, but I'll cover it in a few moments. And then just raising your arms. Okay, and drop your hands down. So, just starting with rooting down, sinking your hips down, bring your hands in front of you and pushing up and sinking. So we feel the rhythm, the flow of the movement all the way through the body, and the direction is from the feet upwards. So the first part of your body, your upper body that you're going to feel the expansion in is here, the belly, that area between hips and waist. Sometimes refer to that as the lower down chin, you may remember. And from there, we will feel movement higher up, but by the time we start to feel that, really it's time to get that sense of sinking back down. This, you can see, line up. Okay. Yeah, what I want to avoid is this, my knee is going too far forward, so I drop back. And again, how far we can drop back without being pulled back is limited partly by what I was talking about before, which is that tightness, particularly in the back, but it could be elsewhere. But also by the thigh muscles, because you'll see as I go back, I'm dependent more and more, particularly on the quadriceps, but everything in the leg. And if I've reached a point where I can't, you can see I'm sort of struggling at that point. Everything's tightening up. So these are both things that will build for us in practice. And just feeling that in the process of sinking down, you're loading the legs and they spring you back up. And then back a bit so my hands don't disappear. Change into the wild goose. And as your arms get pushed out, it kind of opens this area, solar plexus, lower part of the chest. So we start to feel the expansion in the belly and then up in the solar plexus, the middle down chin. And then change into heart in the clouds, and again the belly and solar plexus. But as the hands go up, we feel an opening in the area of the chest, upper back and the shoulders, maybe up into the head. Strictly speaking, the upper down chin is located in our heads as a rule. But these are very broad areas that I'm talking about here, so we don't need to get too accurate about it for the way that we're going to be using it today. So we've got these three regions in the upper body, which these three movements help us to just identify. So then bring your hands around as though you're cradling the ball again and doing them as a little sequence. Lower dantian for the rooting down, that's the belly. And then middle dantian, the solar plexus for wild goose. And then belly and solar plexus, finishing with the upper dantian, upper part of the chest, head and the shoulders, the part in the clouds. And then back to the beginning again and start all over again. Hence the name of this exercise, which is harmonizing or balancing the three dantians. At the moment, I'm not that interested in the actual nature of the dantians, just think of them as geographical regions within the inner landscape of the body. So when we were doing the swinging exercise at the beginning, as I pointed out, actually you can't turn that far in the lower dantian, hips and waist, without actually pulling your body slightly out of the posture that you're in. And yet we end up with quite a big movement in the upper part of the body. So this is how it works. So for here, when we do this, turn slightly and then turn back. And just do this a few times. So when we turn in the hips and the waist, our shoulders follow that movement precisely. So our shoulders move as far as our hips, sorry, wrong one, as far as our hips allow them to. Now going into the wild goose. Now when you do the wild goose, you turn in the lower dantian in the hips first, but then we're opening this section. So that middle section turns a little bit further, but never so much that it creates a straining between those two areas, a tightening between those two areas. That down again. So turning in the lower dantian and a little bit more in the upper dantian. It's very important that we recognize that these sections are connected but independent. So the independence allows a little bit more movement. The connection limits that movement. One more of these. And then parting the clouds. Again, starting the same way in the belly, in the hips, in the solar plexus, and then finally in the shoulders. I'm exaggerating this a little bit, by the way, so my posture may well be going a little bit out of line. Belly, solar plexus, and upper part of the chest. So we build up a bigger area, a bigger range of turn without having to create a tightening in the body, because we're building it up from the ground. So do one more of these on its own. And then back to the balancing the three dantians, but introducing the turn. So you turn and come back. And then when you go into the wild goose, turn the same direction, but just that little bit further and back. And then turn that little bit further again, part in the clouds and back. So you've only turned your hips the amount that you're able to turn them without throwing your weight out. You only turn in the middle down chin in the solar plexus as far as you can turn without actually creating a tightening in your back or your sides. And likewise, when it comes to the upper down chin, you turn just enough. But the sum total, particularly by the time it reaches your fingers, is actually quite big. So the middle of your body, the lower down chin, is sometimes described as the hub of a wheel. If you think about a bicycle wheel, the spoke where it joins the wheel doesn't move very far, just moves the same circumference more or less as the hub. But by the time that same spoke has reached the rim of the wheel, it's moved a lot further. There's probably a mathematical formula that will tell you exactly how much further it will move. So you haven't had to do anything clever with the spoke. You haven't had to bend it or anything like that. And this, in the end, is how we would like to do all of the turns in Tai Chi, in such a way that we get the maximum amount of movement without tightening, bearing down on the space that we go to a lot of trouble to create in the posture. And when we get to those movements that involve the actual turning, try and apply the same idea. We're going to change now to Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. There's that same line of development from the ground, building, expanding more and more up through the body until your hand rises, and then you're able to just draw down again. Building up. So this progression that I described in the turning applies in lots of ways. Sometimes I think it might be possible to follow a movement like this from the ground upwards into your arms and your hands and your fingers, almost molecule by molecule. If you can imagine between the sole of your foot and the tips of your fingers, every molecule, or maybe every cell, let's think about the cells of the body, expanding by a minute amount, and the spaces between the cells expanding by a minute amount. None of them pressured in doing so. But the sum total, I mean, I wouldn't even like to guess how many cells might lie between the sole of your foot and the tips of your fingers. But each little increment is added to the one below it, giving you that much bigger movement without actually straining. One of the Tai Chi classics, much quoted in Tai Chi circles, that really sums this up much more neatly than I've tried to explain it, is that 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds. I interpret that as meaning that a small amount of effort in the right place at the right time, and this is where your awareness comes in to the movement, can have a significant effect, particularly when it's done in conjunction with many other small movements and small amount of effort. This is why the arms can look so flowing in Tai Chi, because most of the work has been done by the rest of your body and by your mind before the movement, the energy even reaches your shoulders. One more time. Coming down, bringing your hands to your sides. Weight forwards, hips dropping back. cushioning for directions. Last time. Changing. So thinking of the movements in this way will make us more and more aware of the actual routes, as in ROUTS, the directions that we feel those lines of expansion along. These pathways through the body associated with each individual exercise. It's comfortable adding the turn. And then switch sides. Remember, weight forwards, hips dropping back, so you can feel that slight pull, not an uncomfortable feeling, but a pull nevertheless on the tail of your spine. And again, if it's comfortable, you can add the turn. It will still have a strong feeling to it, even when we're paying attention to those three regions. And you might want to make it more detailed in those three regions. That was just a way of introducing you to the idea. In fact, it should, again, you could think of it working almost on a cellular level. So now, back to this movement, sinking down and pushing up. Feel your hips being pulled down, but next time, feel as though your hips are being pulled back by somebody. And then drop down. So it's here, lower back, hips, buttocks, all going back as you sink down. And then you just rest in that lower position until you feel that you're upright and you push up. And then as your hips go back, imagine somebody gently takes hold of your head and pulls as you go down, so that now we get that lengthening through your back. And it's a massage technique, actually, when somebody pulls on your head. And what it can do is just pull on the spine so that the spaces between the vertebrae, where the cartilage pads fit, just draw out a little bit. The cartilage pads are generally quite springy. So obviously it's not kind of a huge wrench or anything like that. So actually, as you go forwards, you're being pulled back, but your head is being pulled forwards. And there's this gentle lengthening of your back. And we go into rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. And as you come up, the weight of your head responding to the pull of gravity will gently press down on your spine. So I've talked before about this model of using our legs as springs and our back as springs. And it's almost like somebody's gently pushing down on your spine and giving it a chance to bounce back up. And then change into polishing the table. One more time. And then let's come back to this with that awareness of how the range of movement in your turn builds through that process of the dantians, or whichever kind of way of building on that you wish. And just come slowly to a halt. So with my friend here, it's actually meant to hold a pen, but it really illustrates. See, it's got a little spring on it. And you can see when I pull the spring up, the gap between the coils increase. When I push the spring down, the gaps between the coils contract. And pushing it down means I can do this. It springs up. Can't see it very well actually, but can't see it better there. Got a nice little smile on his face. It's actually a very good example of how the legs and back work in Tai Chi. I can even do this. I can spin it round. See, there you go. So that's really how it feels. Imagine the spaces between the coils. I can get it in the right position for you. As I push down, being like the spaces between, say, your vertebrae, or the spaces between the cells, or whatever, whatever image works for you. And imagine that happening in your legs and your back every time you sink down and every time you push up. And in fact, whether you're sinking down or pushing up, it's happening right now because gravity is still pulling you down. And unless you've collapsed on the floor, which I'm hoping you haven't, you will be standing up, and so there's that resistance there, and you want it to work without restriction all the way through your body. If my little friend there had a kink in one of the coils, or if one of the coils had rusted and gone stiff, it wouldn't have worked. So this idea of the increasing range of the movement without the same kind of effort that we might associate with that is very much can be very much related to the idea of the springs in the body. It's a great way of working with these arts, and I think of that downward and upward movement as one of the key sources of energy in Tai Chi. Rather than straining against the pull of gravity, we learn to yield to it. We don't just use less energy trying to be upright. We actually create a cycle of energy within the body. So let's have a go at stretching between heaven and earth, because this is another one where we can feel that process, or those processes going on. Again, as always with this one, take it to whatever stage is appropriate to you. So turn your left hand palm down, raise your right hand, let it wind around and push up. Turn your hands in as though you're going to hold the ball. As you bring your hands together, sink down a little bit, and then pushing up and sinking down and pushing up. So here we feel that whole springiness through the body, or that whole sense of, here's the compression and then the release, working through the whole of your body in one smooth action, hopefully. You may notice areas that are resisting that. Those are the areas we want the leaders to think about. First of all, our posture. So for instance, a very common error with these sorts of movements is that as the hands go up, we do this, or we pull the hand back, or we lean back. And you can see in this position, that's going to tighten my back and going to make it more difficult for me. I want the hand slightly in front. And if anything, you imagine that you're leaning forwards as a corrective act. You can then start to just move your weight across a little bit. Again, this is a difficult one. If I go too far, you can see now everything's locking up. So sometimes I say you can do this one in a slightly wider stance. Now my feet are turned out, and that will help the weight sink into the legs. So if you're moving the weight, what you want to do is, first of all, I exaggerate, you drop down in the supporting leg and then you push up. So you're actually creating a little kind of curve downwards and up. And then again, if it's comfortable for you, you bring the empty leg in, step out as you go to hold the ball, sink down. Very careful with your knee as you do that. Through. Loading and releasing. One way of describing it. You think of compressing, particularly through your legs, but also, as I just illustrated, through the spine, and then again releasing, and maybe just raising the leg. And be careful when you step out, because you're trying to drop down in one knee, and unless you're really conditioned to doing that, it shouldn't be too far. Just a little drop should be enough. And you can go down a little bit further. If you're feeling a bit wobbly by raising your leg up, either just leave your toes down until you feel that you're really aligning well over your supporting leg and keeping the weight down. And or here I've got my back close to the wall, so if I do go to raise the leg up and I feel a bit wobbly, I can rest back. I don't have to think, oh, I'm going to fall over. So it's for you to work out how appropriate either of those is. Oops, nearly fell over. You will get the odd little wobble. It's a stretching between heaven and earth. One more time on each side. And shake out. In stretching between heaven and earth, where actually, just like with the three dantians, working with the idea of a trinity, three elements, and this comes from old ancient Chinese cosmology, that there's the earth and there are the heavens. Slightly different meaning to heaven to the one that we have in our culture, more related to the actual physical sky, and in between we stand. So it's heaven, human, earth, and we kind of make the connections there. And again, that you could relate that to the downward pull of gravity from the sky upwards and then upwards towards, and so on and so forth. So some of these ideas go back a long way. Yang would be the heaven, yin would be the earth, and the transition between the two again gives us the idea of movement and energy. So 1 foot forwards and transferring your weight forwards and backwards. So these ideas we bound around the Tai Chi world. From a martial point of view, that understanding is based on the idea of Tai Chi being a counter-attacking art. So if we were doing push hands, partner work, and I would be standing here, I would allow my partner to push me back to load this leg and to load the back even. And then I would return the push like that. So I would let them push me down and then use the energy they had given me to respond. And in push hands, we have 5 stages. And again, we learn them in a linear sense, but in fact, it's chicken and egg. But we listen to the push. So in a solo sense, we listen to the pull of gravity as it works through our body. We yield to the push. In other words, we allow the pull of gravity to work through us, or indeed the push of the opponent. We neutralize the push. So in terms of what we're doing here, I sink down until I feel that the push up from the leg is matching the pull down with the pull of gravity. So in other words, they balance each other out. I borrow. So I go down to that point and then just a little bit further, not so far that I tense up, but just getting that little bit extra. So it's almost like I get to here and then I go down a little bit further and finally I return. In other words, I push back in terms of partner work. In terms of what we're doing here, I allow that borrowed energy to move me into the empty leg. So we listen, yield, neutralize, borrow, and return. And I've mentioned before the idea of just pausing slightly, not being in a hurry, to move from one leg to another. It's not this. And it might help you to think of those 5 stages each time. And that, to begin with, that'll be quite awkward. First of all, you've got to remember them. And then it takes time to go through them. But like most things in Tai Chi, gradually that will become much smoother, much more intuitive. So again, it's listen, yield, neutralize, borrow, and return. And as you neutralize and borrow, that's also when you can begin to raise toes and heel. Because both the neutralizing and the borrowing stages will really focus you on aligning, settling in each leg. And the more you do that, the more stable you will be on that leg. And the more you'll be able to empty out the other leg. And then just stepping in. And then you return. So, as I said, I've described it in very linear terms, but you should always be listening. You should always be yielding. Gravity is working on you every moment. So every moment, all 5 of those elements are there. Well, 4 of them, if not the return. Well, no, there will be the return unless you collapse to the ground, I guess. So yeah, all 5 are constantly working in an ongoing dynamic, again, related to this notion of movement of energy through your body. And try on the other side. So transfer your weight. Think of those 5, or maybe think of 1 or 2 of them. You don't have to build this up straight away. Once we're aware of the possibilities of those different elements, we can choose where to put the emphasis. Sometimes it might be more appropriate to put the emphasis on the yielding, for instance. Sometimes it might be appropriate to put it on the returning, or whatever. And then raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. And then taking a few full steps in whichever direction suits you best. Change direction if you haven't done so already. check out. Okay, have your right foot forwards. Fisherman castanet. So back in your right foot, give yourself time to think about that compression or those stages, whichever works for you. And eventually what you'll find is going forwards now, just letting your arms swing out, rather than thinking, right, as we do at the beginning, should I go forwards now? Should I go backwards now? Or whatever. We get to recognize what we're waiting for. There will come a moment when we feel the push coming up, and that's when we basically yield to the push coming from our own leg and allow it to flow through the body. And of course, always remembering here that the arms are following. So it's not really until you're yielding into the front leg here that your arms are swinging past your hips, or likewise into the back leg. So at first, using these ideas is always a bit clunky. Oh, it's not quite working for us. When do I go? But like a lot of things, through that system, we gradually develop a very intuitive sense. Now is the right time to go. Now isn't. Now is. You feel the push. You feel the energy coming up from the ground through your legs into your body. And then pushing away. Earlier, I described the borrowing stage, those 5 stages, as a sort of an extra drop, but it could be something different. So this time, repulsing the monkey, leaving your front hand there, drop back, and as you sink into the back leg, you turn in the upper body. Now you're winding up the spring in the upper body, and so that's part of the borrowing process. And then you release with both the weight and the release of that middle spring in your back. So don't be too quick to turn. The main part of the turn, the purpose of this exercise, will come as you're sinking into, yielding to, neutralizing in the leg that you're resting on. So again, if this way of looking at it is useful to you, then in the borrowing stage, in this exercise at least, we're turning. And so everything that I said about the turn, the way we view that comes into this. Okay, and then on the other side, so starting the game with fisherman cast the net. Like all the ways of describing these movements, I use, they're simply models to help us take our awareness deeper into what is actually happening. So make use of them when they're useful to you, but don't feel that you're failing if it happens not to be useful or anything like that. And certainly don't let these ideas distract you from the joy of doing the movements. They're there to enhance the experience of going through the movements. One more time. Pushing away, remember the hands come down, your elbows go out a little bit. And it's that curving movement upwards, given partly by the shape that your arms are making. But what we do get here, and you can see a slight change in my arms, is a sense for that third set of springs, which is the arms. So primary spring is the legs. Secondary spring is the back, spine. And finally, in third place comes the arms. And that's generally regarded as in order of importance, really. Although I think play around with that idea between the legs and the back especially, and particularly if we were doing chair-based exercises. And then pulsing the monkey. Once more. And shake it. Okay. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Onto one shoulder and your arm. Side. Lower part of your back. And then around your hips. Legs. Belly. The upper part of the chest. So as always, quote Bruce Lee, if you point a finger at the moon, don't mistake your finger for the moon. That any of these ideas that I come out with, the images, the sort of like the frameworks, are the fingers pointing at the moon. If it's not working for you, don't worry. If you're interested in something and you're thinking, oh, what were those 5 stages, or whatever, you can always email me and ask me, or ask me to go over it again sometime. Very, very happy to do that. But as I say, if it was like well, this isn't significant for me at the moment. Don't worry about it. File it away. You might find in 6 months or a couple of years' time that, oh, yeah, that's quite a useful model. So whatever has sort of worked for you in this session, hopefully it is there. And if you chase after things that you haven't quite got yet, then it's a bit like chasing bubbles around a room. You're going to grab at them, you're not going to get them, and you might even lose what you already have. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. Apart from other elements that I've talked about with this exercise, actually it's a chance just to, in a sense, let go of those things that are floating around you and you can't quite grasp, but to actually come back to what was working. Maybe it was the springs, maybe it was the Dan Chen, Heaven, Earth, Man, whatever is a bit, maybe none of those, maybe something else is prominent in your awareness at the moment. Those are the things to come back to as you come back to the mountain, to sort of take with you out of the session. So sinking down, embrace tiger, and return to the mountain. One more time. And stand. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So, as always, any questions or anything like that, either ask